Opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers or Rogers TV.
Local for January 14th, 2014. Our topic today, deportation and the potential for the GTA to be a sanctuary city. Next on Talk Local Live. Welcome to Talk Local for 2014. My name is Michael A. Charmont. And today we have a very interesting program and several wonderful guests to add to our topic. We're talking about deportation. We're also talking about the potential for the GTA to become a sanctuary city. Let me first introduce my guest. My first guest to my immediate left is Mr. Deepan Buklakadi. Mr. Buklakadi is an Ottawa-born construction worker and is an activist who in 2010 was stripped of his citizenship by the Canadian government. He's fighting to stay in Canada and is facing deportation as a result of weapons and criminal charges that he served. But there is a situation where they're discussing his citizenship, which we're going to delve in further in our discussion. Beside Mr. Buklakadi is Mr. Saeed Hassan. Hassan is an organizer with the No One Is Illegal Toronto organization, a group that represents migrant justice organizations and workers who are directly under duress, if you wish, and are undocumented and represents their rights. And he's also spearheading a campaign to potentially make the GTA a sanctuary city. And finally, our legal advice here on the panel, very important, particularly with this discussion, is Mr. Gidi Mammon. Mr. Mammon is an immigration lawyer and a senior partner with Mammon, Sadaluk, and Kingswell. Thank you, gentlemen, all, for being here today. I want to first of all start with Mr. Buklakadi and just give a little bit of background here. Now, there's been a lot of press and a lot of documentation which has been done with regards to your situation. And I just want to give the folks at home a little bit of background. We invite you to call in during this program. This is a live call-in show. You can reach us at 905-848-5483. And you can ask questions, you can field your comments, and participate in the program. That's what makes this show so important. A little bit of background. Mr. Buklakadi, your parents arrived in Ottawa in 1985 from India. They were considered domestic help to do gardening and cleaning and cooking for the ambassador of India. You were born in 1989 and you were issued a Canadian passport. The question over your citizenship arose in 2010 after you unfortunately served a term of 3 years, a jail sentence in Joyceville Penitentiary for drugs and weapons charges. Upon your release, Ottawa initiated a removal against you for claiming that you were born while your parents were employed by a foreign government. And a federal tribunal was held in 2011 and deemed that your citizenship should be removed. Currently, you are a man without a state, if they say. And you're going across Canada now to appeal to Canadians to review your situation and consider what the next steps are. I thank you for coming here today. It's difficult, as always, to put your position out there when things aren't going your way, but we appreciate you being here and helping us to understand your circumstance. Where are we today in your situation, and what is now happening?
Well, at this point, a lot of my conditions have been reduced, and immigration is well aware that I am considered stateless at this point. So they can't deport me, but yet I'm still stateless. And where I stand is that I have a UN application put in, as well as a charter application in federal court, and I'm waiting for court dates to commence.
One of the things that we were able to get in our research was that there is a stipulation in the Canadian government that says that if parents give birth to a child while they are employed by a foreign embassy and government, that child or any of the offspring are not considered Canadian citizens. In your case, though, you were issued an Ontario birth certificate, were you not?
Yes.
Right. So even though, and that is a bit of a quandary in a bit of the facts or the idiosyncrasies in your case, as a result of you being incarcerated in 2010, they believed that you were not a Canadian citizen, and there were extenuating circumstances which they believed merited your deportation. And right now you're saying you are a Canadian citizen, but the Canadian government says you're not. And the Indian government, what is their position with regards to this?
They have clearly stated that I'm not an Indian citizen. And the former High Commissioner has wrote a letter to the Canadian government, which there was a press release, sorry, a press conference on September 18th at the House of Commons, clearly stating that my parents had not worked for him in any capacity as of June 12, 1989.
Okay, I'm going to go to you, Giddy, and I'll come right back to you, Hassan, but I want to get the legal point of view right now because it's pretty pertinent. You're familiar with this case. What is your take on this?
Well, this is a situation I've seen quite a few times in my career, although it's rare, you know, if you're in the practice long enough, you are going to run into them once in a while. Basically, Canadian citizenship law says everybody born on Canadian soil is a Canadian citizen.
Except
if your parents were in Canada working for a foreign government. Now, the reason we have that is because for these diplomats who come from overseas, they work in our embassies and consulates here, and we don't want them to use their posting and have Canadian law sort of affect them. So we don't really want them to lose any status or gain any status while they're here. While I'm not going to talk specifically, there's a question of whether that has merit or not. But what happens is you have these lower level people who are, you know, secretaries, who are cleaners, who are chauffeurs and drivers for the consulates and embassies, and somehow they're caught in this mix. And so in his case, in Deepan's case, his parents were low level. They were not diplomats, they were not ambassadors, they were not consuls.
But they were employed by the Indian embassy, and they did come over here.
Well, I don't know, I wasn't there, but the facts as he's presenting them, according to him, his parents stopped before he was born, and according to the government, in order to take advantage of this section, they're taking the position that they were working. And that's a finding of fact that a court has to determine.
Both your parents are Canadian citizens, correct?
Yes.
Right. But here's the interesting part. Here's the interesting part. You said something about him having an Ontario birth certificate. So first of all, it doesn't matter. Everybody born in Ontario gets a birth certificate. The birth certificate does not establish Canadian citizenship, right? Because there is this one exception. If we didn't have this exception, the birth certificate by itself is de facto proof of citizenship. But because of this quirky little provision in the Citizenship Act, we cannot ever know whether a person who's born in Ontario is actually a Canadian citizen because of this one provision.
Now, when your parents filed for citizenship, when they applied to the Canadian government, they applied with all the regulations and through the correct channels, but they were under the assumption that you were already a Canadian citizen, hence why they didn't put your application in. Is that correct?
Yes.
So as a result of that assumption, you then, at the same time that your parents applied for their Canadian citizenship, you did not. Then upon your criminal conviction, that's when the government got involved and started to dig into your citizenship, your documentation, and then They took your passport away, is that correct?
Yes, I want to point out one thing about the passport situation. A passport can only be given to someone that is a Canadian citizen. It's in the Passport Act. So, and there's no provision in the Passport Act where they say that they can take away a passport in my particular situation.
There's no provision. Okay, I'm going to go to Saeed Hassan. Again, Mr. Hassan, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. One of the things that you're spearheading is how would you say, a proposition that would suggest that the GTA becomes a sanctuary city. Explain a little bit to us what that position is.
Well, the thing is that in February of this year, Toronto actually became a sanctuary city. It's the first sanctuary city in the country. And there are similar actions that are taking place in Hamilton, in the Peel region. So across the country, people are trying to make their cities sanctuaries. And the reason for that is that the Canadian government is systematically taking away citizenship. What we're seeing in Deepan's case is that the government is going through all of these contortions, all of these acrobatics to take away one man's citizenship when they're blatantly wrong. At some point, they'll just have to apologize. But what we're seeing is families, parents and grandparents, children, all being denied citizenship. Citizenship is just being taken away left, right, and center. And so cities are stepping up and saying, okay, if people are going to lose status, we've got to make sure they have healthcare, education, job security, housing. So what we're seeing is a response to the federal government's broken immigration laws, which has totally changed the lay of the land, so that most people can't get citizenship in the country, and so they have no choice but to get basic
I'm
services.
going to stop you there, and I hope that the folks in Peel are interested in this conversation. We invite you to participate. 905-848-5483 is our telephone number. You can chime in and you can comment and ask a question. My name is Michael A. Charbon. Talk Local will be back with more right after this. Welcome back to Talk Local. My name is Michael A. Charbon. We're talking about deportation. One particular topic of interest is Mr. Deepak Budlakati, and we're also talking about a sanctuary city in the GTA. Joining me today, right beside me, is Mr. Deepak Budlakati, who's an Ottawa-born construction worker and basically had his passport and his citizenship revoked by the Canadian government. Beside Deepan is Mr. Saeed Hassan. He's an organizer with No One Is Illegal Toronto, and he represents justice for the undocumented people and migrant workers, and is also spearheading a movement to sanctify, if you wish, the GTA as a sanctuary city. And finally, our legal advisor, Mr. Giddy Mammon, immigration lawyer and senior partner in Mammon, Saddlelock, and Kingswell. Deepan, I wanted to read something here. Alex Pavlovich, who was a spokesperson for the immigration minister, stated in an email that he sent to the Toronto Star, and I quote, he says, "This convicted criminal has never been a Canadian citizen. He should not have chosen a life of crime if he did not want to be deported from Canada. While it's true that Mr. Budlakati was issued a Canadian passport, his passport application claimed incorrectly that he was a citizen, and this false information led to Mr. Budlakati receiving a passport that should not have been issued." Now that's Minister Chris Alexander's spokesman. That's a government spokesman who's stating this. There still is some really weak positioning from the government on this. As you stated, you already had received documentation, and from what we've gathered from what Giddy had mentioned, and there is some documentation that your parents were not employed by the Indian government at the time that you were born. How does that make you feel when you have a government official who's saying things like this? I mean...
Well, I don't feel really good about it. The fact that he doesn't even understand my case. He's just probably getting a message from the minister himself and deciding, well, just write this, and then he wrote this. In response to this, I want to point out that under the Passport Act, it goes through 3 different sections before it's even issued. Their sole job is to make sure if you're a citizen or not. They don't just issue a passport just like that. And it passed on 2 different occasions, and now I got a passport. And then they're saying 19 years down the road that I'm not a citizen, and the passport was given to me in error when I committed a crime.
But none of this would have come up. It was in 2010 when you were in Joyceville that Immigration Canada came, and as a result of their investigation of, I mean, unfortunately, you spent 3 years in jail. I mean, if you create a criminal offense, you can't even come into Canada.
But, Michael, can I just jump in here
Absolutely.
for a second? Let's ask your audience. Here's the question. I'm going to tell you a story about a young man who was born in Canada. He was born in Ontario. He's now 25 years old. Committed a crime, found guilty, served his sentence.
Paid his debt, yep.
Paid his debt. What do you think we should do to this guy? Well, I said, well, he's paid his debt to society. He's
Correct.
Canadian. He's born here. Oh, that's it. We're end of game, end of story. That's not what's happening here. And in fact, I think you're also wrong about something. Let's suppose he never committed a crime. Let's suppose this young man went to university, discovered the cure for cancer right here on Canadian soil. He's 50 years old now. The government's going to come back to him and say, hey, Deepan, you're not a Canadian citizen because your father was cleaning the offices of the Indian consulate when you were born. Does that make any sense to anybody on this planet? To anybody? I don't think so.
Yeah, I believe you have a strong argument.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
I believe you have a strong argument.
It's absolutely ridiculous. Why? Because somehow we feel now that he's committed a crime, aha, you see, the law is obviously
But you see, there's
speaking-
so many people who are denied entrance into Canada just to visit on a holiday.
He was not denied entry. He was not denied
Yeah,
entry.
but the reason that this came to light was as a result of his indiscretion.
Okay.
I
Well,
think we need to go back to what Giddy is saying, is that how there's 165,000 people in prisons today, right? Eventually, most of them will be released back into society because this is what this society has decided we do with people who do criminal acts. How is it that people who just don't happen to have citizenship get to be deported? Either we're saying we believe people who do crime shouldn't be in Canada, then we're saying we should kick out about 165,000 people. We're not saying that. We're saying particular people based on passports, based on a broken law. People who are mostly people of color, people who are racialized.
You can't say that. That's bull.
I mean,
you can't say that. You can't say. Sorry,
of
I'm sorry.
the
You can't.
people in
You can't.
jails
I'm
over
so-
the last year.
Okay, that's a whole other discussion. I'm not
Over the
going to
last
sit.
decade.
Hold on. I'm
But-
not going to sit here and have a discussion about criminality and color. That's not what this program is about.
Oh, absolutely,
What we're
but
talking about.
immigrants
No,
are people
excuse
of
me.
color.
Excuse
Those
me.
are
I
the
want to
ones
make a
being
point.
kicked
I'm
out.
sorry. I want
For
to make a
sure.
point
Please
because
do.
there's many people who are sick and tired of hearing that excuse. People were put in jail because they did something wrong. If they served their sentence, they paid their debt to society.
Absolutely. Then
If
we
that
agree,
had no-
then they
if-
shouldn't be
but-
deported.
That's not
what
the
I'm
point.
saying.
No,
Why
listen.
should they
First
be
of all, there are
deported?
many Canadians, and we read this on the net. We've heard this
Right.
that say being a Canadian citizen is not a right; it is a privilege.
Absolutely.
If you
Well, if you
want
think
to
that,
enter our
that's-
country, no, if you want to enter Canada, you cannot enter Canada if you have had a criminal act that you've served under 5 years. Only after 5 years is it then stated that you then can visit Canada, depending on the criminal. I mean, there's certain
Have you heard
indiscretions
of Conrad Black? Conrad Black was allowed back into the country on a special permit. No, this applies to some people and not others. He was a convicted criminal who was allowed back. This is about color. This is about
Yeah,
class.
Conrad Black.
That's what happened.
Although we don't want to get into the idiosyncrasies of law, but there is a difference between white collar crime and drug trafficking, gun offenses, and break and enter. Those are there are separate issues there.
Yeah, and that issues poverty and money.
That's not. No, that's crap. I'm sorry. It's not. You can't use that as an excuse. I think
You
the
don't
point.
think there's a
the
problem
point. The
that
point.
Conrad Black is allowed into the
I'm
country?
not here to discuss
while
Conrad
Deepan,
Black.
who's
We're-
been born here, is being kicked out. There's something very wrong
You know
with
what?
this.
I think if there wasn't a scenario, and that has been said on many of the blogs, if there wasn't a scenario where there was a criminal indiscretion, this probably would not have come up.
Well, I think he
Would you
said
not-
the
would you not-
opposite, even if he had. Please.
Actually, in a very the identical case I had to Deepan's case involved no criminality whatsoever, zero. There was a couple who were in Canada. They were working. I'm not going to mention the name of the embassy. They had 2 children in Canada. No criminality, no nothing. Presto, the kids were like 19, 20. Somehow, this issue came up with no criminality. We fought like tooth and nail to get them to stay. Now, contrary to what you said, these 2 kids were pure white blonde hair, right? So there was no question. In that particular case, was not a factor of race. I'm not disagreeing with you. By the way, I do believe that ethnic minorities are overrepresented in jails.
Absolutely.
But in this particular case, I can tell you from experience, I've seen blonde hair, blue-eyed kids getting into this trouble without any criminal history, and a Deepan situation, which triggered this. Let's find a way to get this kid out of here if we can. But the law is stupid equally because it makes no sense to me for those 2 kids who were born and raised in this country, went to school here, and were leading productive lives, all of a sudden to find out, what do you mean I'm not a Canadian citizen?
So the real salient point then is whether you were born. We know you were born. I'm not trying to suggest, but the time frame whether you were born at a time when your parents were under employ of the Indian consulate or not.
That's right.
One could say that if you were issued a birth certificate and you were in possession of a Canadian passport, that validates your position that you are a Canadian citizen.
Yes.
That's pretty well. There's not too much you can take from that. Do you feel then, as a result of your criminal indiscretion, that you were then targeted specifically because of that?
100% I got targeted. I was at OCDC, Auto College Detention Center, and I got an altercation. I went in the hole for 30 days. A guard came up to me and asked me if I'm a citizen or not. What right does the guard even have to ask me? There's no screening process in the provincial jail. From this point on, I got taken out of the hole. CBS came and seen me. They told me that I'm not a citizen. I provided them a copy of my birth certificate and a Canadian passport. It took them about 3 weeks to come back and tell me that my passport has been given to me in error. I did not have no hearing or nothing. They just took away the passport at that point and downgraded me to saying that I'm a long-term permanent resident. Once I got sentenced to my 3-year sentence, Joyceville, at that point I had a admissibility hearing. I want to point out, at the admissibility hearing, a lot of my evidence got thrown out, or the member did not want to hear it. Keep in mind, this is not like a public court hearing. This is a little room in the penitentiary with a CBSA member, a board member, your lawyer, and yourself. There's no panel of judges. There's no one else there, just you guys.
I want to hold you there because I want to give you an opportunity to finish your thought, and we'll come back after commercial, and we'll hear the rest of your story. You're watching Talk Local. My name is Michael A. Charmont. We're talking about deportation, this one particular story, and about a sanctuary city in the GTA. We'll be back with more right after this. Welcome back to Talk Local. My name is Michael A. Charmont. We're talking about Mr. Deepak Buklakadi and his situation with the Canadian government taking away his passport and denying him his citizenship. And we're also discussing the term of a sanctuary city in the GTA. You can chime in with your comments and your questions, 905-848-5483, and join the conversation. Before we left, Deepan, I wanted you to continue your description of what occurred in your admissibility hearing when you were in Joyceville Penitentiary. It sounds like Manny said it in the break, it sounds like jungle justice in a way. You were put in a dark room and you were not availed counsel. I
was availed counsel, but a lot of my evidence was not heard because the board member said that the evidence they were bringing up, that they don't have jurisdiction for that evidence. So that being said, anything I brought up, certain things were just dismissed and wasn't even heard. Keep in mind that this hearing is the starting point of my whole battle. If everything was clarified at that hearing, I wouldn't be in the situation I am now, stateless.
So I throw this to you, Giddy. I mean, this sounds. I would say Deepan has a point here.
Right.
There's something that's gone on that isn't quite kosher.
Let me tell you what I think is not kosher about this process. If I were to show you right now, Michael, you're a sophisticated guy, you're an educated guy, I show you a legitimate Ontario birth certificate. What are you going to say to me about the holder of that birth certificate?
That person was born in Ontario.
But I would tell you...
But that doesn't necessarily mean they're a citizen, though, correct?
That most people, in my opinion, if you polled 1,000 people, almost 1,000 people would tell you that person, by virtue of their birth in Ontario, is a Canadian citizen.
Right.
Okay. When he applied for a passport, right, he had a legitimate birth certificate. He didn't lie. He obtained a birth certificate. He came out of the hospital. His mom applied for a birth certificate, said he was born in this hospital. They got a real live birth certificate, which he is still entitled to. He's entitled to that birth certificate no matter what happens.
Correct.
Even if he gets deported, that birth certificate is still legitimate. So now he goes and applies for a passport. They say, are you a Canadian citizen? What does he do? He checks off, yes, I am. Of course. Of course I am, because here's my birth certificate. He honestly, genuinely believed he was an Ontario-born Canadian citizen. What the government did in order to order him deported, to get the deportation order yet, which thankfully has not yet been executed, is they said that he lied. When he ticked off that box and said he's a citizen, he lied. Even though probably 1,000 out of 1,000 of your viewers would conclude exactly what he did, that I'm a Canadian citizen. I was born in this country. I was not born in any other country. I didn't lie about how I was born or where I was born. And that is the tiny little hook that the government uses to deport this young man.
And Deepan, you're considered a stateless person.
Yes.
You have never been to India. You have no connection to India whatsoever. You were born in Canada. You were born in Ontario.
Yes.
You were issued a passport, so considered a Canadian. In the event that you had an indiscretion, you served your time, you paid your debt to society, and you're moving on. And as a result of that, basically, the Canadian government is starting to meddle, if you wish, and is creating a situation which now, under your, are you still under the parole restrictions?
No.
Okay, so
that society, that's completed.
Well, that's good, because that was very difficult for you. I mean, you were under restrictions. You couldn't do anything, couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't get training. You couldn't get education. So at least now, do you have the ability to retrain and integrate back into society and start to begin your life?
That wasn't parole conditions. That was immigration conditions on me. That were denying me the fact of work, denying me the fact of doing any kind of training, and so forth. That was immigration. And I'm going back to the passport aspect. I was on my mom's Canadian passport when I was a child for 4 years.
Right.
Then I got my own Canadian passport. I just want to clarify that there's two different passports that I was essentially on.
Okay, let's go to our first caller. Let's go to Karen from Brampton. Karen, thank you for calling. Do you have a comment or a question for us, Karen?
I have two comments, actually.
Sorry, we need to bring the volume up in the studio because we can't hear Karen here, and we
Can you
want to
hear
make sure
me?
that Go ahead, Karen. Thank you. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay. I just have two comments, actually. One is, if they're living here, I don't think they should be deported. Given that, at the same time, Saeed, I think
Yes.
his name in the checkered shirt.
Yes.
Hi.
Okay, he made a comment which annoys the heck out of me, and Michael, you kind of jumped on it, and I can tell you I live in Peel. As a Peel resident, I can speak volumes here, and I will tell you I speak for a majority. Stop using profiling as an excuse. We are sick and tired of hearing, well, immigrants are getting this flack, and as a South Asian or Muslim or anyone else, we are being profiled.
Karen,
There is
can I-
just
can I
as
fo-
many white people, Caucasian, that are in trouble
I'm
as
happy
there
to
is
respond to that.
anyone else from another country. So that is tired, and I think it's not going to work, and it's not going to go over, and it certainly won't. If you're trying to press this sanctioned city or whatever is going on here, I'm sick of listening to it myself.
Okay, Karen, just hold on. I want to give Hassan a chance to respond to Karen.
Perfect. So two things. One is, over the last 10 years, the number of people of color in prisons have increased by 75%, while the number of white people at the same time has actually gone down. Now, that's the criminal system. If you look at the immigration system, over the last 6 years, the number of people getting permanent residency has stayed very, very stable, but people are being denied refugee status, family class, people are coming into the country as temporary foreign workers. Permanent residency, permanent citizenship is being denied largely to people of color. The laws are doing that. They're being
Well, if you have a
These are-
criminal background, then you shouldn't be entitled to
these
come
aren't
here,
people.
and
I'm
I
talking
agree.
about grandparents.
And I don't
I'm
care.
talking
You
about
can go on
parents.
and
Yeah, but
on
wait a
and
second,
on and
but
on.
wait a second.
Just let me
Part-
finish. You
Part
can
of
go
the- part
on
of the
and on
reason that they
about what
don't
you
want
feel.
grandparents in that because they are a burden to the medical position. That's number one. I will
Yes.
also say to you that regardless, the people, whatever color they are, yellow, black, purple, pink, or white, if they created a criminal act, they're put in jail.
Right.
By being able
right.
to identify specifically is using an excuse, and I think you are doing a disservice to those people because you are making a statement based on color and ethnicity instead of the reason why they were
A
incarcerated.
75% increase in 10 years cannot be a result of some completely apolitical. It's not just that these people are doing something wrong. I'm not talking about many numbers here, right? There is something very broken. Even the Ontario and the federal ombudsman have said that there is racialized policing and racialized
No,
incarceration.
you can't say
Both
that.
these are government
okay.
bodies, right? It's not just me.
So let,
Go
let
ahead,
me-
Gid.
let me just jump in. I'm not going to agree with Hassan from the point of view that if you commit a crime, you'll be prosecuted if you're of color and you won't if you're not. I
Not
think,
what I'm saying.
right, I know that's not what you're saying. I think that's what some people are hearing.
That's
though.
what we want to clarify
Right.
here.
I mean,
it is an unfortunate
if
statistic.
you're black or white, you got to go to jail for robbing a bank. Let's all agree to that.
Yes.
At the same time, we all read the newspapers. We also know
There's a
that-
disproportionate
one second.
representation.
The Toronto Police Services right now is under tremendous scrutiny for their carding program.
Absolutely.
If they know that they are carding far more colored people of color, than they are.
okay.
Than
That's
they
a
are
whole-
white people.
okay,
but that has nothing to do with this
that is
discussion.
a red herring. I mean,
Right.
we could go. That's a whole
Right,
other topic.
but that's a
Karen,
fact.
are you still there, Karen?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Karen, I want to bring you back to Deepan's circumstance here. You heard a little bit about what his situation is. What is your take on this? Doesn't it
Well-
sound like there's a bit of funny business going on with the government here with this?
I think there is, and I think I understand what he's saying, but I also find that, keep in mind here, he's also committed a crime. And
But he paid his. I mean,
He's
that is
committed
a
a
fact.
crime.
But he's paid his due. I mean, if he was considered a Canadian citizen, he paid his debt to society. He's admitted he did something wrong, and the whole thing about someone serving a sentence is to rehabilitate them and integrate them back into society. So that is somewhat of a red herring. I would suggest.
No, I agree, and I've been listening to him, and I said in my first initial call in that if you've lived here and you've committed a crime and you've paid your dues, okay, we're moving forward. I think that depending on the crime, it, should depict the amount of time he's in jail. But I also get a very strong, and it's coming through, that he's kind of a bit cocky. And I'm not sure if he's using that and starting to, he committed a crime to begin with. So the cockiness he needs to get rid of, because he shouldn't start now dictating what he thinks and what he sees and how the court should be and all this and that. I think he needs
Well,
to
Karen, I
have
would say
to be a little humble
that is
too.
his, yes, of course. I would say that's his privilege. I mean,
You can't put people in jail for cockiness.
no, and
But what I would say, Michael, is I think this caller actually reflects the viewpoint of Canadians, Canadian policy, Canadian public opinion more than this legislation
okay,
does.
hold on
This
for a second.
legislation
I just want
says
to hold
he
because
should
I
be
got to go to
going
break.
home.
I got to go to break.
Right.
I encourage our viewers to participate. You two can have a moment. Thank you, Karen, for your call, by the way. We encourage you to participate. You have an opportunity to play in this show as well. 905-848-5483. My name is Michael A. Charbon. We'll be back with more right after this. Hold on. So let's talk about today's poll. Are Canada's deportation laws fair? You have an opportunity to vote. You can vote yes or no. www.rogerstv.com/talklocal. Back with more after this. Welcome back to Talk Local. My name is Michael A. Charbon. We're talking about the case of Deepan Budlakati, his situation where his citizenship was taken away from him, and there is some question whether he is a Canadian citizen and whether they can deport him. And I think he has a very engaging prospect for us to discuss. That's what we're discussing here today. Beside Deepan is Mr. Saeed Hassan. Mr. Hassan represents a group called No One Is Illegal in Toronto, and he's also purporting the cause for the GTA to become a sanctuary city. And finally, my favorite lawyer. I mean, most people, I like this guy, Giddy Mammon. He's an immigration lawyer. He's a senior partner with Mammon, Saddleluck, and Kingswell. Before we left, we had a caller, Karen, who was quite adamant in her point of view, and there were some points that she brought up which made a lot of sense, and there were others that, we all question where and what we're going to do. We would hope that you would take the opportunity to call us and interact in our program, because it is you who helps to make this program what it is. 905-848-5483. Let's go to our next caller. It's Adiba. Adiba, welcome to Talk Local. Do you have a comment or a question for us today?
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. Happy New Year.
My comment is about the lady that was talking before me, Karen.
Karen, yes.
Yes, I understand that people should have responsibility and they should not put themselves in places where they could be violating laws, whether they're Canadian or not Canadian. This is just a human issue. Like, you should not do anything against the law. You should not. Your freedom stops when other people's freedom starts. That's how I believe. But to act like there's no racism, there's no profiling, there's nothing happening, everything is perfect and pinky white and pinky this. No, things are not perfect, okay? And let me just give you, if Karen was doing crack while she's at work and saying that in front of everybody, she will be fired. Mayor Ford is not fired because he's a white and he's a man, and that's why things like that could be taken in a different direction, where if it was someone like a woman or someone of color, they will have a totally different rules. And she is a woman, so she knows that there's a difference between men.
Well, I always find it interesting
Thank
how
you,
when people call in, it's interesting that people's perspective goes back to color. I use an example. If you're a fisherman and you want to catch fish, you do not go to the center of the lake at 12 noon and drop your hook at 6 feet, because you're not going to catch any fish. If you want to catch fish, you either go first thing in the morning or really late at night, and you go where the weeds are, because as an angler, you go where you catch fish. It seems that when the police department and people detain people who are involved in criminal activity, that unfortunately there is a disproportionate amount of people of a certain color or race that all of a sudden they're using that as an excuse. And that seems to be something which is prevalent both that we've heard in the doctrine of folks who comment online, and then we hear the alternative position of those people saying that it's a racist point of view because it is only targeting those people. That, unfortunately, I will say, in this particular instance is another show. But what I would like to comment on is a little bit further, if we could, and we'll talk about the sanctuary city. And Hassan, your representation for undocumented workers and making sure that they are taken care of and at least given an opportunity. The definition of a sanctuary city is one where all people, regardless of immigration status, can live without fear of detention or deportation. And it's a city where individuals can exert autonomous control over the places they gather at, the schools, healthcare, food banks, social services, and their neighborhoods. And basically stating that as a person who is interested in obtaining social services, you can't be questioned as to your immigration status. Does that kind of put it in an envelope for you?
Absolutely. So about in the 80s in the United States, a number of cities, 35 to date, declared themselves sanctuary cities. They said that the federal government is taking away people's status, like we see with Deepan trying to deport people. And so cities need to step up and actually provide people with basic services. Because what is citizenship? Citizenship is mostly access to things like schooling. What teachers said is if they are in our communities, they should be in our schools. Doctors said if people are sick, they should be able to get healthcare. People should be able to get housing. People should be able to live with dignity. And in February of last year now, Toronto City Council agreed. Almost unanimously, 3 opposing votes, Toronto became Canada's first sanctuary city. And as a result of that, discussions have started from Vancouver to Hamilton to Montreal, where different city councils are now looking at this and being like, this makes a lot of sense.
So I want to touch back to Adiba because you're still on the line. Adiba, I want to give you a follow-up. And we talked about sanctuary. Do you have something to follow up for us?
Well, I think regarding the guy that they took away his citizenship, he was born in Canada. This doesn't make sense whatsoever. If you're born in Canada, or if you're Indian descent or Irish, you're not going back to Ireland or England. You're going to stay here. That's where you were born. And so whoever is saying, well, it's because of maybe he's South Asian or maybe he's Muslim, that's why this happened to him. In other ways, if he was white, this would have not probably happened.
I really think you're playing the wrong tune on this one, Adiba. The scenario occurred that as a result of his incarceration that he was questioned, and that was where the object came up. And I think,
Mike, let me just jump in on Hassan's comments regarding the sanctuary city, because I'm not sure your viewers really have a good picture of what that means. The thing that you read suggested that you can't get arrested if you're without status in Toronto. That's not true.
Correct.
We're getting people arrested all the time. So what does it really mean, a sanctuary city? Sanctuary city means this. Let's suppose you have a woman. She's here unlawfully. Okay, she's here without status.
she's an illegal immigrant.
She has no status in Canada.
But she's considered an illegal immigrant.
No, she's not. She's
Okay.
considered undocumented.
No, she's considered an illegal immigrant.
It's all semantics.
No, it's not semantics. She is an
The
illegal
federal
immigrant because
government
she
does
is
Let me make
here.
the point. Let me make it.
Okay,
We'll go for a dictionary right after the show, but right now
She's
let's
an
just-
illegal
okay.
immigrant.
This woman is here. She has no Canadian status. Can I use that?
Yes.
That language. Okay. She has no Canadian status.
Or she's an undocumented immigrant.
Undocumented
She's illegally
immigrant.
here.
Okay.
Illegal immigrant.
So she's here. She has no status. One day she is sexually assaulted. Right? What would you expect her to do?
Go to the police.
Right. She goes to the police. Now they're going to ask her for identification. They're going to ask her questions about her status in Canada.
Which is legitimate.
Legitimate. Now she's afraid to go to the police. Why? Because she's afraid that the police will then dial the phone number of the immigration department, and then not only
Because she's here illegally
That's
and
right.
she's not
and
supposed
then the
to be
immigration
here.
department is going to take her, scoop
And they'll
her
still
up.
arrest the person who.
Right. Well, they'll arrest the person, but they're going to deport her so that she's not going to be here to testify.
But here you are
But-
talking.
Can I finish?
But hold on. So
let me
Michael,
jump
so
I'm gonna let you do this, 'cause otherwise I'm gonna-
So the whole point, what a sanctuary city means, that those government agencies that are run by the city of Toronto, for example, the police, social assistance, whatever it might be, they are directed not to inquire about a person's Canadian status.
Is
Why?
it not their obligation?
So can I just say?
Well, yes,
Okay.
but for this
Thankfully-
regulation that the city has
Right.
passed.
So
Okay.
thankfully, the Toronto Police disagrees with you because the Toronto Police agrees with saying we need to not ask people, victims and witnesses of crime, what their immigration status is. That's actually their policy, which we fought for and won back in 2006. Right? So there's actually Toronto schools are saying, look, it doesn't have to matter that people don't have immigration status. They should be able to have schooling. Right? So we have to ask ourselves as community, as people who are watching this show, people need to ask ourselves, are we going to let this federal government make these laws where it keeps taking away people's citizenship? Or are we going to say
Excuse me,
we
they're
are a
not
welcoming
citizenship.
community?
No,
We're
you're
a
incorrect.
welcoming community.
I'm sorry,
where
Hassan.
we want to give
We're
people
getting hung
basic
up with
services.
this terminology. Let me give you a second example, Michael, maybe something closer to home. Let's say, God forbid, somebody dear to you, friend, relative, is the victim of a terrible crime. It happened to be that there was a witness to that crime. That witness was in Canada without lawful status. Now, they want to go to the police to report that crime and to say, this is what I saw, which I think you would want to do. The Toronto police are saying, you know what? Because we have to ask these questions about a person's status, we are going to lose all kinds of witnesses. Therefore, these crimes are going to remain unsolved, and that's a threat to public safety. So, as long as we don't have to ask them these questions, we should be okay. The third and last scenario that I want to refer you to is this. You have a family who's here without status. They come from, it doesn't matter what country, they have 3 or 4 kids who are also here without status. Okay?
Gone.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second. Now, the parents are working.
What about the people who went through the
I
proper
understand.
channels?
I
No,
understand.
you don't understand.
No, I'm just giving you the example.
Okay,
I'm
but
not
it's all
saying,
this heartfelt,
I'm not,
wonderful,
I
you know,
haven't
butterflies
taken
and
a,
homie.
no,
The deal
I haven't
is,
taken a position, Michael. I'm just
Okay.
simply giving you the scenario for you to do what you will. So we have these 3 or 4 kids. They're 10 years old. They're 11 years old. The parents are saying, I am not going to send those kids to school. They're going to stay home in an apartment by themselves during the day because I'm afraid the teachers are going to ask the kids for proof that you have lawful status.
Okay, I have to go
so
to
now
break.
those kids
I
do
have to
not
go to
get
break.
education.
I have to go to break. I'm going to come back, Hassan. You're going to have your moment. I want, when we come back, Hassan is going to make his point. You're watching Talk Local. Get involved. Give us a call. And welcome back to Talk Local, our final segment. Let's go right to our last caller of the evening. It's Darlin. Darlin, quickly, only got a couple of minutes. You have a comment or question?
I have a comment, actually,
Yep.
to you, actually, the host. And clearly you haven't had anybody that personally has been involved with any kind of an immigration situation yourself, right?
I have, but
That's another show.
that's another show altogether. But go ahead. Do you have a comment or a question, though, Darlin?
Well, a comment really is that it's not cut and dry for every situation. And let's say someone was willing to, donate a kidney to one of your family members that didn't have a status, and there was no other exact match. Would you say, well, I can't because they don't have status and they shouldn't be here?
Well,
I like that
what I
question.
will say, no. I have an answer for that, and it's not the Michael Charbon show, but I will say that there is a certain decorum by which that you have to follow, and all those people who are in line are done a disservice if someone jumps ahead. Anyway, so Darlin, I thank you for your comment. I want to give Hassan a final comment here because I don't want to make it as if you were muted by any point. This is our final segment, so in about 40 seconds or so, if you could just sum up your point, I'd appreciate it.
I think people need to know back home that the Canadian government is stealing away their status from their children, from their grandparents, and from their neighbors. And people need to educate themselves and fight back. We need immigration status for everyone.
Saeed Hassan is an organizer with No One Is Illegal Toronto and also a proponent of spearheading the sanctuary city status for the GTA. Hassan, thank you so much for being here. I also want to go to Deepan. Deepan, I want to give you just a final moment just to kind of give us a little bit of a finality of what your position is and what's next for you.
Okay. I want to start by saying that I do apologize for the crime that I committed. I paid my debt to society and now I'm trying to move forward in life. And I want to point out as well, if Canada has set laws and they're breaking their own laws, in my case, everyone should be worried about it.
Well, Deepan, first of all, I appreciate you being here today. It's not easy to come in a public forum like this and present your situation. So, Deepan, I really appreciate you being here, and I wish you the best of luck. Quickly, Giddy, you got a final comment. The lawyer always finishes it up. Quickly, my friend.
Well, I'll tell you something. I think that you made a mistake. You know, I think you paid your dues. Me, as a Canadian, I'd give you another chance. I think that the other Canadians probably would. I think the government's got to back off a little bit, and they do have the power to allow you to remain in Canada on humanitarian grounds, provided you behave yourself. So I hope you learn from your lesson, and I hope they give you a second chance that you deserve.
So with 1 minute, I just want to just touch back one more to Hassan about the sanctuary city. Is the GTA now a sanctuary city? So we are considered that officially now?
No, Toronto is.
Toronto
Peel
is?
is having these discussions. Hamilton is having these discussions. I just want people to remember also that these are all indigenous lands and that those are the laws we need to follow. That these are lands that belong to the Mississauga, the Anishinaabe people, the Algonquins and the Six Nations. And that there was a history of people coming and stealing these lands, and now those people can't be deciding who comes here and who lives here. That's what we need to go back to. We need to remember our history.
I'd like to thank all my guests. I'd like to thank the callers for calling in today. An interesting topic. We hope to continue this in further shows here on Cable 10. My name is Michael A. Charbon. I'd like to thank you so much for watching Talk Local. We'll be back with more tomorrow with another show. Thanks for watching. Have a good evening. Very interesting. Very